So the last 2 weeks, David has been dealing with the country of Ammon. King Nachash had died. David wanted to show respect because Nachash had saved his brother's life. So David sent emissaries to Ammon, to the son, the new king, King Hanun, to pay respects. Your father had saved our king's brother's life. And the king, his advisors said, don't trust them. They're probably spies. And therefore, they were sent back in a manner humiliating them, cutting half their beards off vertically and half their clothes exposing their buttocks and sending them on their way, which basically was a declaration of war. And war broke out, and they realized they weren't strong enough to stand up to David alone. So Ammon recruited mercenaries from Moab and from other surrounding places. And they did not let when they set up the mercenaries, Ammon made it their business. They themselves would stand guard over their city directly and the gates of their city. They didn't want the mercenaries at the gates because they were concerned the mercenaries were liable to turn around and go into the city and conquer our own country, which is the problem when you're hiring mercenaries. So instead, they hired mercenaries to go out, and David sent his commander-in-chief, his chief of staff, Yoav ben Tzruya, who went with his brother Avishai for the purpose of leading the battle against all these countries, with the understanding that Yoav saying to Avishai, if I'm having trouble, you come to help me. If you're having trouble, we'll come to help you. But we understand our battle we rely on God. And so the battle was won. And now Israel's at peace. You've been with us the last several weeks. You now know Israel's at peace. Israel's got no problems. Israel's wealthy. Israel's powerful. All the nations around them have been subdued and vanquished. Everything's fine. There is a promise from God that a son will be born to David, even though he already has about 6 sons. Another son will be born, and that son will build the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. And just everything's fine now. It's like being king of some country in the world that nobody's bothering with. I don't know, Monaco, I don't know. Somewhere that never gets caught up in war, and it's wealthy, and everybody's sitting around on the beach with nothing to do but sit around on the beach. And everybody's just has it nice. And we're going to learn a very important concept. And we're going to learn it in the commentaries. I heard this once in a shiur, a lecture by Rav Avigdor Miller, Zichron Livracha, Sechet Tzaddik Livracha. Rabbi Miller, one of his many, many, many themes, he was a Musarist. A very important part of his rabbanus, his rabbinate, was telling Musar, preaching moral values. He was not everybody's cup of tea. Zichron Livracha, he was very, very right-wing. And as I say, not everybody's cup of tea. And even for right-wingers, there were certain times you would hear him and say, oh my gosh, I've been waiting a whole lifetime to hear this guy to hear somebody say it that way. And then there were other times he'd say things where you would say, I don't know what to do with that. And Rav Miller, central focus, he said, and it's common sense, it's not healthy to have nothing to do. Religiously, spiritually, it is not healthy to have nothing to do. And that's one thing, take a vacation, you're burned out, right? You just really burned yourself out, and you just need some time off, or you're working a hard day and you're taking a half an hour off to watch I Love Lucy, I don't know, or you go out for a cup of coffee, whatever it might be. But there are people who have nothing to do, and they always have nothing to do. For example, a lot of teenagers who don't have parents who make sure they're doing their homework, going to school. And that's Rav Miller's. Rav Miller's not so much talking only about an elderly person retired who sits around all day watching TV, which is also a problem. But Rav Miller would talk about teenage kids in the inner cities. If their parents don't make sure they do homework and go to school, and that's where the problems begin, when they have nothing to do. When they have nothing to do, they go on the streets and they get involved with the wrong people, and you know where it goes from there. And this story builds on the premise, on the principle that David HaMelech thinks was so good that he had nothing to do. He suddenly found himself, everybody's at peace, country's at peace, no serious civil litigation going on that requires me as the king and chief judge to adjudicate. We're at peace with all our enemies. Financially, we're doing great. And he had nothing to do. And he got into trouble. And he got into trouble. We're going to learn the Gemara on this. For this, I'm not only going to do Malbim and some of those usual commentaries, but we're going to go on the Gemara in the Sechet Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Zayin, Tractate Sanhedrin, Folio 107a. We're going to be learning about that as well. The issue of David and Bathsheba. In King James, Bathsheba became transliterated as Bathsheba. But name is Bathsheba, daughter of 7. Let's find out what we're talking about. Thank you for being here. And as you know, we won't be meeting on Thursday because of Thanksgiving, and we will not be meeting on Sunday, even though there's all kinds of news this week already. Again, for the Thanksgiving weekend, that many of you are going to be taking off. So I will also with Denise. Here we go. Thanks so much for being here. First of all, we wrap up the text. There's no commentary at the end of chapter 10. So the Ammonites realized that they had incurred the wrath of David after they cut the beards of those guys, half of their beards and half of their clothes, leaving them with their buttocks exposed. And so they realized it's going to be a war, Ammon, so they hired out people from Arameans, Aram. They're Ammon, and they're going to be at war with David, who's now not only the kingdom, it's all Israel. So he brings in Aram also, Arameans and Ammon. And Moab already, no point bringing in Moab because they are the ones that David subdued and vanquished. They're the ones that David made lie down, body, soldier next to soldier next to soldier, measuring them with ropes to get the full length that they occupied, and then marking the rope at like a 2/3 point. They executed 2/3 of the soldiers. They left 1/3 alive. That went back to Moab, killing his parents and his entire family, except for the one brother who went to Ammon. King Nachash protected that brother. Now he's dead. The son Hanun has done this stuff to him. So now Hanun, he can't bring in mercenaries from Moab. They've been wiped out. So he brings in mercenaries from Arameans. But Yiskaru at Aram. And he rented Arameans. It's not an alliance. It's a mercenary thing. And so he hired them, et cetera, et cetera. And David, hearing that they're getting for war, took Yoav, the whole army, et cetera, et cetera. The Ammonites marched out, took up their battle position at the entrance of the gate because they wouldn't trust anyone else to protect their gates, lest others turn around and take over their country. And the Arameans and the others, they took stand in the open fields. Yoav saw there was a battle line. He made a selection, all his picked men, da-da-da-da-da. He's going to fight Aram. Yoav is going to fight Aram. And his brother Avishai is going to fight Ammon. And Yoav said, if the Aram are too strong for me, come with your men to help me. And if Ammon are too strong for you, I'll come to help you. And as I said last class, and if they're both too strong, got to pray to God. Well, the strategy in the world doesn't help sometimes, but God can do miracles. So let us be strong. Chazak v'nitchasek b'yad Ameinu, v'yad Arei Elokeinu. Let us be strong and resolute on behalf of our nation, the cities of our God, and God will take care of us. God will do what he deems right. And who's to know? It's a common thing you hear people say at wartime, God is on our side. And that's not something soldiers and nations should say, God is on our side. Their concern should be, are you on God's side? You don't know what side God's on. But are you on God's side? So God will do, he doesn't say God is on our side. Hashem shomer aleinu, Hashem yishmor v'yamod bishvilenu. He's not saying God will fight for us. You're saying Hashem ya'aseh hatov. God, oseh means to do. God will do the good, be'einav, in his eyes. May it be good for us. And so they went to war. Yoav and his troops went against Aram, and Aram fled. And when Ammon saw Aram fleeing, they fled. After all, Aram had hired them to be supportive mercenaries for Aram. Well, we're not going to die if the guys who are supposed who want us to help them, if they're running away, we're not going to stay here and get slaughtered. So Ammon started to run, and Aram started to run from Avishai, and they broke off the attack, went to Yerushalayim. Now that the Aram saw that they had been routed by Israel, they, instead of waving a white flag, laying down their arms and saying, that's it, they regrouped to do it again. And as I mentioned last class, and it's pertinent even today with all this talk about a ceasefire with Hezbollah, when people do not lay down their arms and raise a white flag and sue for peace, you don't have peace. You just have a pause until the next war. The American Civil War ended. The American Civil War ended when General Robert E. Lee came to Ulysses S. Grant, basically with a white flag, and sued, begged for peace. We give up. And they were required to hand back all their weapons. And famously, Ulysses S. Grant, knowing that the beauty of a man, of a soldier, is his sword and his gun, that's their pride, their gun, their sword. Grant famously said that Robert E. Lee, in giving up, in basically just waving the white flag, that he and his officers could leave with their swords. They're not going to do anything bad, but they'll be in full military dress. They don't have to go through the humiliation as men of war to have to walk with military dress without their swords. Okay, but the understanding was that they had to give up their everything else. They gave up. That's what brought peace, not a ceasefire. They gave up. They surrendered. They gave up their weapons. They gave up their 5 or whatever amount of confederacy, their states, more than 5 states. They gave up the confederacy. They were remerged back into the Union. That's how a war ends. Same thing with Japan and Germany during World War II. They gave up. They laid down their weapons. They surrendered. They submitted themselves to war crimes trials. And that was it. When you have a simple ceasefire, despite all the hoopla and hullabaloo, all you're doing is, if you're against an enemy who is determined to wipe you out one of these days, you're giving them time to regroup and to rearm and to learn from the mistakes they made last time, not only to have more weapons, but smarter weapons next time, be more careful with the pagers and walkie-talkies. All the lessons we learned from Navi are pertinent in our lives today, always. Just so happens we're in Shmuel Bet at a time of war in Israel, but the lessons of the Navi always are true. They're not just interesting Bible stories. Continuing. So Hadad-ezer, this king now, went out and he called forth the Arameans from across the Euphrates, and he got a big, gigantic army. David was informed they're really, really lining up an army. So he assembled this time not only Yoav's battalion and Avishai's battalion, but all of Israel. He assembled the whole entire army, and they crossed the Jordan, because again, here's Israel, and this is the Jordan, where the other side is Ammon and Moab and Aram. The Jordan is the boundary, the protective boundary. They crossed and they went to war, and it was a straightforward fight. Aram drew up against David, but the Arameans were put to flight by Israel. David killed all these people, 40,000, an interesting number, since that's the number we always hear in the news these days. killed 40,000 of their horsemen. In those days, they fought without hiding behind women and children. He also struck down Hadadezer's army commander. And when all the vassal kings of Hadadezer, all the mercenaries who were subservient to him and whom he required to stand and fight with him, saw that they had all been routed by Israel, they submitted and became their vassals. And it's like Japan after World War II, Germany after World War II, we give up. And we effectively are your vassals. So that the America actually marched our soldiers and took over Germany and Japan and imposed our own occupation, peacetime, whatever you want to call it, government, and finally helped them set up their own governments. But Germany and Japan initially were vassals. That was it. And the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. Vayiru Aram laHoshia'od et bnei Ammon. Aram, who had come to battle on behalf of Ammon, they said, we're done. We're finished. We're finished. Ammon is finished. Moab is already finished. They're all finished. Shalom al Yisrael. Israel's at peace. New chapter. Vayehi l'tshuva rishona le'eit seit hamelachim. Now, it was like later in the year, like figure about 6-9 months later. So you have a war going on. Let's say it ends, I don't know, December. So figure June. In other words, well into the next year, at least a good 6 months have passed. Le'eit seit hamelachim. And the season was ripe, the time of year when kings go to war. What does that mean? Time of year when kings go to war. I'm very close with a student at the UCI, University of California at Irvine. She's been over the house a few times. Denise has met her a few times. And she's at Irvine, she's in the law school. And she drops me an email every 3-4 weeks, back and forth, and updating me on the latest anti-Semitism at Irvine. As you know, it's no news. All the campuses are the anti-Semitism is running wild everywhere. The Jews are in hiding because the Jews don't know how to stand up and fight back the way we did 50 years ago when I was in Columbia. And so they're all hiding and all afraid. They're all asking, oh, protect us, protect us. Thank God Almighty that he's got mercy on these people who don't fight for themselves, that he's going to give them a president who finally will do something about it and will give them the protection that they're not accessing for themselves. And so she was writing me that the anti-Semitism and the so-called anti-Zionism, which is anti-Semitism, we don't have to go through a long thing about that. She's saying it's there, but it's not like the riots that they had a few months ago. And I wrote her back and I said, those riots will be coming late April. Save this email, put it somewhere, put a file, and take a look at it, make a note in your calendar, look at Rabbi Fisher's email from November, whatever, that Rabbi Fisher in November predicted that the riots will start next April, late April. How do you know? Because I'm 71 years old. I went to college 50 years ago. And after 50 years, I know that the riots on colleges take place late April and May. That's how I know. Why late April and May? For Pesach, for Easter? No. May is when finals come. And so they want to get out of finals. So if they tear up the campus and they they know how these milquetoast university administrators are, and they all agree to call off finals, it's machaya. You don't have to study. You don't even have to attend class all term because you know that comes April, we're going to close down and they'll give us off of finals because they'll feel guilty and they'll set up rooms with Play-Doh and cocoa and dogs to take care of us. And so I told her. And so she said, why won't they do it now also? Finals coming in December. And I explained, I think you can figure it out yourself. You don't have to be 71. I said to her, they don't do it in November, December because it's cold outside. They don't run wild around the university when it's cold. But in late April, early May, it's a machaya. It's spring, it's nice. So you set up, it's one thing to set up a nice little encampment tent when it's snowing and it's freezing. And it's another thing when it's nice to be outside anyway. Well, the Navi is telling us there's a time of year that kings like to go to war. Any king who's got a bug up him wanting to go to war normally waits for a certain season. And we're going to look at the commentators, what season. And so the Navi is saying it came the time of year when kings go to war. Not every king goes to war, obviously, but those kings who are looking to conquer something. Putin was waiting to take Crimea, waiting to take Ukraine. There's Erdogan in Turkey. He's always trying to take whatever he can get out of Kurds and out of the Armenians. In the Sudan, they're always looking to make war. There are certain countries right now that are always looking to make war. Iran's always looking, who can we take over next? So they normally wait for the right season. Nowadays, the factor is different from what it was in biblical times. In biblical times, you needed a time when there was a lot of grass. Why? Because you didn't have tanks and you didn't have vehicles, personnel carriers. You needed horses, chariots, and you needed horses to have grass to feed on. So just as the student rioters at UCI will not go right, I just knocked into my thing, so it's like I'm up and down. Just like the student rioters at UCI are not going to go rioting, are not going to be building encampments when it's cold. And in California, I mean, it gets really cold in December. Sometimes it gets as cold as 40 degrees. I tell you, it's unbelievable being out in California, how they ruined this state. It's like such a God-given, beautiful state, and how they ruined what it is. The worst it gets in the winter is 40 degrees. 3/4 of the time in the middle of the winter, it's warmer than it is in New York in the summer, only no humidity. Anyway, 40 degrees, when you live out here a long time, 40 degrees, 35 degrees is unbearable. It's like living in Minnesota. So when you're making war, you need grass for the horses that are going to be carrying, leading your chariots and all the things, your horses. So in other words, the Navi is saying, and it was grass time, grass season. It was at the turn of the year, the time of year when kings go to battle. Yoav, and David sent word to his chief of staff. David's the commander in chief. Yoav is the chief of staff. That Kol Yisrael, he said, let's finish off Ammon for once and for all. They destroyed. See how they devastated. Whichever word is stronger, destroyed or devastated. They destroyed it. They completely destroyed Ammon. Vayatsuru al Rabbah, and they set up a siege. No food, no water, humanitarian nonsense. They sieged Rabbah. They destroyed Ammon. Ammon had started up. By now they've driven. Aram wants nothing more to do with them. Aram wants nothing more to do with fighting David. Moab already was destroyed. 2/3 of their soldiers. Ammon was defeated, and then they backed into their gates. So there was still unfinished business, just as Israel today has unfinished business left with Iran. Probably, hopefully it'll be this year that it gets resolved. They're probably just waiting for a change in Washington. So David sent Yoav off, and what about himself? The David Yoshev Yerushalayim. And David, knowing the army's in good hands with Yoav, decided to just take it easy in Jerusalem. Let's look at a commentary or two. The Malbim. So the Malbim is saying, Vayhi l'tshuva Shana was the turn of the year. Your Moshe al Yedei Sheyoshav Hamelech Beveito. It's saying that because the king went to sit back into his house, his palace, and did not personally participate in fighting the commanded war of God. Now, understand, nowadays, it is not incumbent on Netanyahu or on the defense minister. Used to be Yoav Gallant. Now it's Yisrael Katz. It's not incumbent on the modern Israeli or other army for the political defense minister to go into war. It is understood in today's warfare, the chief of staff, the generals go to war. And actually, America's chiefs of staff, the head of the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, they don't go to war. They send everybody out. They have generals going to war. In biblical times, the heads of the chiefs of staff went to war. They would say, Acharai, follow me. And that's still the Israeli ethic in great measure. During the Yom Kippur War, Sharon, he didn't have to be in the front. He could have been in the office. Ariel Sharon went to the front and led his men across the Suez Canal and defeated Sadat and Egypt. And that's how it's always been with Israel. And we've seen on the Sunday class several times, Gallant has been in Gaza. Now he stepped down and they've got the new guy, and we'll soon see Katz from time to time in Gaza or whatever. But it would not be expected of Netanyahu, even though he does go to the front. But in biblical times, it was understood the king goes to battle. Just think if any of you have ever read Shakespeare or seen Shakespearean movies, Henry V, I don't know, like the king goes to battle. The king goes to war. Henry V, there's a very famous soliloquy on Saint Somebody's Day, Saint Something's Day. And I know that I'm going to get a chat note from someone, the name of that, where the king, it's just like one of the great speeches. It's really like Vince Lombardi of the Green Bay Packers before the Super Bowl, getting all of his soldiers ready to fight France. And if I'm not mistaken, they end up losing. But kings went to war. Richard III, right? He's in the middle of the battle. My horse, whatever it was, something for a horse. My life for a horse. I got to update myself. I've been teaching too much Torah lately. I used to be really good with Shakespeare. I even was able to spell the word Shakespeare correctly. My kingdom for a horse. My kingdom for a horse. Right. Because he was going to get killed, which he did. And more than anything, not to be a king, he simply needed a horse to get away from the battle. Because he lost his horse. My kingdom for a horse. All right. Anyway, Richard III was a bad guy. Okay. So David, Malbim is being criticizing that the text is telling us when it says that David sent Yoav to battle, while David sat in Jerusalem, doesn't say remained, says Yoshev. He sat. He relaxed in Jerusalem. Very often I need to improve on their translation. Yoshev, to sit. So anyway, it's saying that David was not at battle. Lilchom Milchamad Hashem. He didn't go to fight. Ba Ma'aseh Zu Liado. Instead, he did nothing and therefore got himself into trouble. Ulaval Tomarsha Haya Yagea V'Rafeh Yadayim. And in case you're going to say in his defense, well, come on, Rabbi Malbim, you can't expect him to have gone to war. He was exhausted from just battling Ammon and Moav and Aram, rather. So if you're going to say that, well, he was exhausted from the battle that had just ended, nope, not a good excuse. Omar Shahayal Tshuvat Shana. The text says it was the turn of the year. It was months later. He had time to rest up, and he was fine. Ulabal Tachshov Shelo Haya Et Ra'ui Letzet Mipnei HaKor V'HaGeshem. And in case you want to defend him, his not having gone to battle with the troops, but staying behind and sitting around, saying that, well, it was a time of Kor. It was freezing cold outside, and Geshem and rain. It was the middle of the winter. Amar le'eit set amlachim, but the text says le'eit set amlachim, the season when kings go out to battle. It was a comfortable season to go to war. I mean, war is never comfortable for people who are, except for people who just love to go to war. But there's a difference between fighting in the winter when it's raining and freezing versus in the warmer weather. So no, it's not an excuse that he was exhausted. He had 6 months to vacation, and the weather was fine. Ki haya b'chodesh Sivan. It was like the month of June. Sivan is the month after Pesach. That's the month of, I'm sorry, 2 months after Pesach. That's the month of Shavuot. Pesach is the middle of Nisan, and there's Iyar, when we celebrate Israel Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut, on the 5th of Iyar, unless it's around the weekend, and Shabbos, and that's when you celebrate Yom Yerushalayim. And then Sivan, the 6th of Sivan, is Shavuot. So that's June, very comfortable weather. Shekol Malchei Eretz Yotzeim. That's the time of year when kings go to war. Ufneim B'Krav. So why didn't he go to war? Not because he was tired, not because it was bad weather, inclement weather. Ulaval tomar shehayatam milchama ktana she'ein kavod hamelech letzeit ba be'atzmo. And maybe you'll say, well, the reason, in his defense, the reason he did not go to war with Yoav is that it was a really small war. It was like a peanuts kind of war. Really, it wasn't a serious enough war. It was beneath the king to be part of that war. Like that war when Reagan became president, and that small war. I count on all of you to send me the chat later. When I go blank for a moment, I get so absorbed in what I'm teaching, and I go blank for a moment. But I remember when Reagan became president, the left made a lot of fun of him because he took over a small little country that was on the verge of going communist. And his goal was to prevent communism from getting a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. It was the Monroe Doctrine kind of stuff. But that kind of war is not for the king to get involved in. So if you'll say, well, maybe David stayed out of that war, the new one, because it's just picayune. Amar ki shalach et Yoav tzartzavav yad. Wait a second. The text says that it was big enough that he had to send the chief of staff and call Yisrael, the entire army, the entirety of it. Everybody basically went except for him. Shem kol sarei chayil v'giborim vet kol Yisrael. This was a major battle that absolutely destroyed Ammon. It was a good time of year, and he was rested. And for this, it was appropriate that their king, King David, should have been leading the battle. And it tells us the war went on a long time because there was not only, first of all, to destroy a nation does not take a day or two, and to hold a siege implies an extended period of time for people to start feeling the effects of no food, no water. Even so, for David Yoshev Yerushalayim, and he did not, David sat in Jerusalem. And so this is not to his honor. And again, this Rav Victor Miller point, he had nothing to do. Le'et Seit HaMalachim, Ralbag, another commentator we learn very often, is saying, Hu bimei hachom. This is in warm season, again, like June. It's a time of year that the fields have grain and crops, and there are fruits in the trees. That's the time of year that while the people are at battle, they're able to nourish themselves because they've got food. They've got grain, vegetables, fruit. That's the time of year to go to war. You don't have to worry about supply lines. So we continue now. Here we go. Vayehila 8 ha'erev. It was around evening. I'd say, look, the evening is different time of year. Think around candle lighting time. Like in the winter, it would be 4 or 5 p.m. In the summer, it would be 8, 9 p.m. Let's call it 6 p.m. in the spring. Well, what am I talking about? It's June. We just said the battles have taken place in June. So figure it's about 7 p.m. and it's nice, lovely evening. They don't have air conditioning in those days, right? But he's in Jerusalem, which is up on the hills. So Jerusalem is always cooler in the summer than, let's say, Tel Aviv. And it's lovely. Yerushalayim in the summer is lovely. And so it's a lovely evening, and it's 7 p.m. It's already going to be a very nice cool breeze. And he's higher than most people because he's in a palace. So he's got like a patio on top, a porch on top. So he just goes out on his balcony. Vayakam David me'al mishkavo. He gets up from his bed, really. So he was lying down. So like that's the good life. It's like late afternoon, and he's lying down. He's got nothing to do. And I don't mean to, God forbid, I should be disrespectful. This is the greatest of all kings we ever had, the progenitor of the Messiah. Holy man. He was the chief justice of Israel's court system. So David HaMelech was extraordinary, but he was a little bit taking it easy. A little, and the text and the commentators are suggesting he was taking it a little bit too easy. And it's not good for a person to have nothing to do. Again, I want to emphasize there's nothing in Jewish law or Jewish mores that says you can't take a vacation and you can't take a break every day and have some time. And I mean, okay, there are those that won't watch TV, but if you do watch TV or go out, you can take, but the idea of just sitting around and I don't want to say that way, referring to David, but having nothing to do, it's not healthy. People should have something to do. Read a book, study. And it's okay to lie down and take a nap, but it's conveying that he was a little bit too relaxed for his own good. So he got up so maybe he was taking a nap at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., nothing to do. And remember, in those days, there was no TV and there was no radio and certainly nobody to text you or text back or WhatsApp, et cetera, or radio or Morse code. So if there was no one around to talk to, and he was just halech al gag beit hamelech. So he got up from his bedroom and he walked out to his veranda, portico, whatever word you want to come up with, the portico or veranda outside his master bedroom, and just looking around. And he sees across the way another home with another porch, and there's a lady, a very beautiful lady, rinsing in a tub, not dressed. Vayar isha rochetzet me'al hagag. He sees a lady, a very beautiful lady, who is washing on her rooftop. So of course the question becomes, what's that all about? Forget about what's the woman doing washing on the rooftop? It's a mikveh. It's a mikveh. In Jewish law, a woman once a month, when she has her period, there's a halacha that from that moment, the husband and wife cannot be physically intimate, and they have to wait during the 5 days, give or take, whatever, a minimum of 5 days. That's the halacha. It's always awkward to discuss, but if nobody discusses it, then no one knows what the rule is. So the woman waits a minimum of 5 days, or as long thereafter until the period stops, the flow stops, then waits 7 more days, what are known as the clean days, the nikiyim, and then she goes into a mikveh to purify herself. This doesn't mean that Judaism regards a woman as unclean otherwise, that it's some kind of misogynist thing, the men are clean and women aren't. First of all, men also obtain the same kind of physical impurity, but in a time when there's no Beit HaMikdash, for the last 2,000 years, we can't gain that kind of purification. Secondly, we were just learning on Sunday, people become impure, tumat mate, the impurity of having come into contact with the deceased, just by setting foot in a cemetery. If you've ever walked into a cemetery, you have become tumat mate. Or if you ever walk into a hospital that has a morgue, then under the same roof, tumat mate. And the only way to purify is with the red heifer, the par aduma, which cannot be done at a time that there's no Beit HaMikdash. So first of all, let's understand, tuma, impurity, is not a comment or commentary on clean versus non-clean. Rather, it's a spiritual thing that itself is worth at least 1 hour and maybe a whole season to discuss. Okay. And the woman goes into a mikveh, and that then makes her permitted to her husband. And even if her husband is not home, she's still supposed to go into the mikveh on the first night possible. So in a rabbinic career, I've known cases where women are having trouble with their husbands and they're not being intimate, they're not touching each other, they're on the way out, they're divorcing, or there are other issues. I know a case where the husband turned out to be gay, and I could just go on with a list of things that come in the rabbi's office over the course of a 40-year career. Even in those cases, the woman must go to the mikveh on the night that she's permitted to go. That's a halacha. The woman goes into the mikveh on that night, doesn't delay for convenience. That's halacha. Okay. So Bathsheba, okay, so what's the mikveh doing on her roof? Because it was a different society in those days. It was a different world in those days. Like, they didn't have television, radio, and they didn't have electricity. They didn't have a lot of the things we have. Now, you build a mikveh, often attached to the synagogue or in that vicinity, and the women in the congregation drive to the mikveh on their night. They make a reservation with the mikveh lady. They show up at the mikveh. They pay the fee to maintain the mikveh, and they immerse in the mikveh, and they come out, and then they drive home. Or maybe the husband drops them off and picks them up, whatever. In those days, you didn't have people driving to the shul. For that matter, you didn't have shuls, right? You had the Beit HaMikdash. That's where everybody went for Yom Kippur. You didn't have shuls like that. The shuls really, really start around the time of the exile from Babylonia. That's a long time coming yet. So people had their own mikvahs. Everybody had a mikvah. Everybody had a mikvah. I'm not making a joke now, but it's like, and not everybody has one, but it's like the image outside of LA that everybody in Los Angeles has a swimming pool. The reality is everybody in Los Angeles does not have a swimming pool. But as a person who grew up in Brooklyn, you come to LA, there's a lot of swimming pools. I don't have a swimming pool. I, even in my 40-year career, had one member of my shul in 40-year career, whose child drowned in a swimming pool in their backyard while they were napping on Shabbos afternoon and left the gate open to their swimming pool. That's a 40-year career as a rabbi. There's much to say. Much tragedy and much joy. So now in California, everybody's got a swimming pool, so to speak. In that time, it was part of a house. You had a little mikveh upstairs. Nowadays, they're bigger, fancier mikvahs. Let's take a look what I'm talking about. Just a very quick moment, just give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Many of you obviously know what I'm talking about. And for those who might not have had occasion lately to see one, see what I could find here. All right. So here are some mikvahs. Let's take a look at some mikvahs. So this is like a mikvah at the Jewish Museum. Walk down the steps into that body of water. That's another mikvah, body of water. Here's a more contemporary mikvah. Looks like one that I remember designing with Rebbitzin Ellen in Irvine. We built a mikvah. We had the great honor of, it's a long story, it's also 2 classes, of what we went through to get that board of directors to put up the money for a mikveh. We built a mikveh. Ellen designed it with another lady who's passed away since. Let's see. Just look at a few more, just give you this idea what we're talking about. Here's another mikveh, obviously shul. Here's a Jewish star to let them know it's Jewish. Here's another mikveh. Let's see if we can find just about 3, 4 more, just so you get a good sense. That's a mikveh. It looks like an older mikveh because of the way the brickwork goes and everything. There's one. So these are all over the place. You may not hear of them, but they're all over the place. And we don't really talk about it because of Jewish laws of modesty. We're not really supposed to talk about sex. We're not even supposed to use the word sex in most cases. I'm doing it because we're having a class and we're talking about this. But normally, like earlier, I used the word intimacy. I was trying to be more, delicate in how I was saying what I was saying. So rabbis normally don't talk about mikveh in the sermon. They talk about being kosher, talk about keeping Shabbat. But there are mikvehs all over the place. Virtually every Jewish community. Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky has a mikveh. That's a nice one. That's a nice one. And I remember when I was finishing law school and I had the opportunity to be a federal judicial clerk for 1 year, and there were several judicial clerkships that I might have taken. And the requirement was it would have to be in a city that had a mikveh. And finally, with God's kindness, I ended up getting an offer from Judge Boggs in Louisville. We just had to make sure there's a mikveh and there's a Jewish day school for the kids. So there's mikvehs. And there's a mikveh. Who would know? Louisville, Kentucky. You think of Maker's Mark bourbon. You think of tobacco, and you certainly think of the Kentucky Derby. And there's a mikveh. Just mikveh on top of mikveh on top of mikveh. Many of them have the blessing, the bracha. Shemel kol chalam. Sher kidshanu b'mitzvah tov tzivanu al tevilat kalim. That's a utensils mikveh. That's a pretty good utensils. That basket, whenever you buy new silverware, metalware, even if it's not silver, but just stainless steel or glassware, anything that's made in the fire from metal, iron, glass, put it in the basket. You dip it in the mikveh. That's a nice kalim mikveh. Wow, much of them are much, much smaller. But okay, I think you get the idea. And so let's get back to the text. Just try to find one more good one. They're all good ones. They're just interesting stonework and everything. Okay, and back to the text. So she's in a mikveh. That's what she's doing on the roof. She's not being immodest. Every woman in Israel had a mikveh. A small mikveh. Doesn't have to be a big, gigantic. It's what I showed you. It doesn't have to be a big, gigantic structure, but it's not the length of a swimming pool. You saw it's a square embodiment of water that the woman can stand in and dunk in, so she gets her face, head, and hair into the water, all of herself immersed at one time. And she does it 3 times, a whole bunch of things we're not going to get into now beyond everything we've just talked about. So Bathsheba was going to the mikveh on her roof. And why'd they put the mikveh on the roof? Where are they going to put it? In the living room? The dining room? It was the practical place to put it, because who's going to look? Go figure. As the Bible eternally is made known to us for the last several thousand years, apparently it wasn't perfectly well hidden, but the Gemara is going to tell us it was well hidden. Let's learn the Gemara in a moment. So it was evening time, nice breeze, 6 o'clock, lovely, cool. Trun gets up from bed, takes a little spazier, and takes a little walk onto the rooftop of his palace. Bayar Isha rochetzet me'al hagag, and he sees a lovely woman. Isha means woman, but we understand she's very beautiful, is washing from her place at the rooftop. Isha tovat maramod, that's how we know she's beautiful. Tov, good. Ma'od, very good. Mar'eh, appearance. So she's beautiful. Next pasuk. Vayishlach David vayidrosh leisha. And David, sholeach, to send, David sent messengers vayidrosh leisha to ask, who is she? Now, if you'll say, but what, come on, David's already married, no? Yeah, but David's married, he's got a lot of wives, and he's allowed more. We've learned much, much earlier in the game that he was allowed 18 wives. And we've been with him for about 6 of those wives, 7. There was time we learned about the 6 wives, and Michal is 7, and he was able to have more wives as the king. Not allowed to have more than the amount allowed, but he's allowed. And he had like 6 wives, each gave him a son. Michal did not give him a son. We learned that. And then we learned the alternative opinion that maybe she died in childbirth and gave him a son on the day she died, because the text said she did not have a child with him until the day she died, which could be understood either way, that to the day she died, she never had a child, or she had a child not until the day she died, had the child and died. So anyway, at least 7 wives that we've learned about, at least 6 sons, but he's allowed more. And she's apparently gorgeous. I mean, the text is saying it. And the text is telling you what the text is telling you. So he sent out, who is she? Vayomer, halo zot bat Sheva bat Eliam. Oh, that woman? Your next door neighbor or the one across the street? That's Bathsheba, based on the King James transliteration. That's Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, and she's married. So that you're not allowed. Eshet Uriah Hachiti. She's the wife of Uriah. From time to time, you'll probably meet an Israeli named Uri. Uriah, the Hittite. We'll talk more about that next time. So she's married. So she's off limits. We're going to learn in the text more about this, but I want to get this piece in meantime and a little piece more, because I want to get in before we break. We still have 5-10 minutes. It was halacha at that time, law. Look, a man is allowed to have more than one wife in biblical times, but a wife is not allowed to have more than one husband in biblical times. If she is intimate with a man if a married woman is intimate with a man other than her husband while she's married, that is adultery. One of the 10 lo tinaf, one of the 10 commandments of the 10 pronouncements. It's capital punishment for her and for the man with whom she committed adultery. It is mega severe. As with all sins that are punishable, punishment only comes in if the sinner first was warned by 2 witnesses before doing the act. So if there was not a warning and 2 witnesses to the act, and that doesn't mean peeping Tom that they're looking in the window as the act is taking place, but if she's told not to do it and she goes into a room with that man and closes a door, it is regarded as though, and it's a man. I don't want to go too far astray here, too far afield. I don't want to go too far afield with this, but it would have to be a man that her husband told her never to seclude herself with, that he specifically said, I don't want you to seclude yourself with this particular man, rather than any man. But if she then would seclude herself with that particularly designated man, whom her husband said, don't seclude yourself with him, and there's a witness who says your husband warned you not to seclude yourself with that man, and she does it and 2 witnesses see she does, that's biblical adultery, punishable by capital punishment. And for both her and the man. And we go more into the laws of Sotah, which we don't have time for now. Okay. So the woman's not allowed to be intimate with more men, but a man's allowed to have more than one wife. Okay. When men went to war, even now it's a problem. Then it was even more of a challenge of people who would go to war and be missing in action, MIA. Nowadays, God forbid, a million times over, someone goes to war and doesn't come back, and where is he? And then it was even worse. They had even fewer methods and machines and technologies to find, locate, and identify people who, God forbid, died at war. Nowadays, look, we've been living this last terrible year, and we've learned about times that the Israeli Defense Forces have found people, the deceased, in the caves, in the tunnels, elsewhere, and then they identify with dental records, DNA. In those times, there were no DNA, dental records. So there was a concern, if someone, God forbid, will die in Ammon, in Moab, in Edom at battle, not only may we never get him back to bury, we may never even get word that he's dead. Now the woman is chained, is an aguna, because she's back home, and maybe the husband's alive, prisoner of war, and maybe he's dead. If he's dead, she can remarry. If he's a prisoner of war, she can't remarry, and she can't find out. It's even worse than now. Now it's horrible. And the anti-Semitism of the Red Cross, who visit every prisoner in the world, except for the Jewish prisoners in Gaza. Just like the International Criminal Court. Never before, never again will they ever issue an arrest warrant on a leader of a democratic country that has its own vibrant court system that, if anything, is anti-Netanyahu to begin with, and they investigate Netanyahu every day, every way. But anyway, back, not to get too far. So a woman would be stuck if her husband doesn't come back. And we don't know if he's alive or dead. And she could be 20 years old, 30 years old. She'll be the rest of her life. She won't be able to marry because maybe he's alive until we find out. So they made a rule. When a man went to war, he had to give his wife a get. A get is a document of divorce. Every Hebrew soldier, every Jewish soldier fighting for Israel in biblical times had to give a get, a divorce, to his wife before going out to battle. It was understood the wife is not going to go running around marrying someone else. And what if she does? Well, then she's a lowlife, okay? She doesn't. But if she does, she's a lowlife, but she's allowed. And the guy who would marry her is a lowlife. And it doesn't happen. But everybody's divorced. So if there's like a 6 month, the guy doesn't come back, and it's 6 months, it's a year, it's 2 years, at some point, the rabbinate says, you can marry again. She's got to get a heter. The rabbis have to rule, all right. And they do, God forbid, in a case like that. Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, had given her a get when he went to war, as everyone else did. It was not unique. It was universal. So you have this beautiful woman married to a man who gave her a get, but he doesn't really want to divorce her, and she's not looking for divorce. But technically, she currently is not married. And she just went into the mikveh. So actually, she now affirmatively can be lain with, can be lain with. It would be from a moral point of view, an ethical point of view, there's nothing to talk about. But from a technical legal view, she is a woman, divorced, just went into the mikveh. From a technical legal point of view, another man, any man at this point, as long as it's not a rape, a man is allowed to be intimate with her. Again, ethics and morals, we haven't even started learning the whole story, and you already know from just what you've heard in a lifetime that the story of David and Bathsheba, is like a terrible mark on David's life. And we're going to learn more about it. So there's no question it was not allowed, that it was ethically, morally unacceptable and beyond the pale. Not just unacceptable, like pushing your way to the front of a line. This is beyond the pale. Nevertheless, from a halachic point of view, before someone would say, and usually the critics wouldn't even know enough to say it, but the first halachic criticism would be, how could he take a married woman? That's adultery. Well, she was divorced. Yeah, but how could he lie with her? She had just gone to mikveh. How did he know? He saw her just coming out of the mikveh. Huh. So that's the scenario. That's what's going on here. Let's just we'll take out like maximum of 7 more minutes just to take a little Gemara. We're not meeting Thursday because of Thanksgiving. We're not meeting Sunday as part of Thanksgiving weekend. We will resume, God willing, with this very subject next Tuesday. Let me just get a little bit of Gemara. I have more than a little bit, but just about 5 minutes just to get a little sense of what's going on here. Let's see. Oh, first of all, maybe I won't even have time for the Gemara. Might have to do the Gemara next time because I want to show you this story. This story, what timing, it just hit the newspapers the other day, just in time for our class. IDF rabbinate opposes asking troops to sign form unchaining wives in case of disaster. November 22nd. That's 4 days ago. I'm reading the daily news and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, just in time for class. That the Israel Defense Forces, there's the chief rabbinate of Israel, the chief rabbi, the chief Ashkenazic rabbi, chief Sephardic rabbi. And then within Tzava, Tzva Haganah Yisrael, within the Israeli armed forces, they have an Israeli IDF chief rabbinate. Not surprising. There are rabbis with all the units, assuring that the food they're given is kosher, assuring that their secular anti-religious generals and officers do not force them to do any activity that is against halakha, if not justified, and watching over the spiritual needs. And then the chief rabbinate was asked, given that people go to war in Hamas and Gaza and Lebanon with Hezbollah, and someone gets taken, and what should we do like we did in biblical times at the time of David and Bathsheba? Should every drafted soldier write a get now in advance to the wife, with the understanding they'll remarry when they come back? And the rabbinate ruled against asking the troops to sign such a form. Just read you a little bit of this, and this will be what I won't go to do the Gemara because it's just so timely. Let me just get it a little bigger. Okay. Fearful it will hurt soldiers' morale, a high-ranking IDF rabbi expressed his opposition to offering, it's Tuesday, just the other day, to offering soldiers a document to sign that would allow their wives to remarry if they go missing in battle or return from combat mentally incapacitated. Because a mentally incapacitated man cannot divorce his wife because he doesn't know what's going on. So that's another story for another time. We don't proactively ask soldiers to sign the document, said Lieutenant Colonel Avihud Schwartz, head of the IDF Rabbinate's Department of Jewish Law. The decision not to actively offer soldiers the option is out of concern that doing so will negatively impact soldiers' motivation to fight. You can understand that. However, Schwartz said that any soldier who requested the document could receive it. And then explains Babylonian Talmud, the Tractate of Tuvah, records tradition in King David's time. Soldiers wrote conditional divorce papers to their wives before they went to war to allow their wives to remarry if they went missing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. So this is phase one of the story of David and Bathsheba. We now understand the entire setup. And he has asked about her, investigated, and he wants her brought to the palace. Her husband is away at war, and he wants her brought to the palace. And what better cliffhanger can I leave you with Thanksgiving than that one? Okay. Thank you for being here. Thanks. Have a wonderful